The second the heavy fist of Gary the Sledgehammer Elms sliced through the humid, sticky night air of Hong Kong with a whistle, he was absolutely certain this fight would end in 3 seconds. But he had no idea that he wasn't actually fighting a man. He was fighting a ghost he himself had invited to a dance of death. Hong Kong, a rooftop of a residential complex in the Tsim Sha Tsui district. November 18th, 1958. The clock reads 11:45 p.m., but the city below does not sleep. It hums like a disturbed beehive, and that hum mingles with the heavy breathing of 2 men standing on an improvised ring of cracked concrete. The air here is so thick with humidity and the smell of cheap malt that it's hard to inhale, but Gary doesn't care. He is the Royal Navy boxing champion, 100 kilograms of raw, drunken rage, accustomed to breaking jaws in port taverns with a single blow. Opposite him stands an 18-year-old boy, you know as a legend, but to Gary, he is just another Chinese dancer in street clothes, too small to be a threat and too arrogant to live. You look at the scene and think, this is a slaughter of the innocent. Gary towers over Bruce like a rock, his shadow covering his opponent entirely, and in his eyes burns that dangerous spark a predator gets when the prey is cornered. But you are missing one detail, a tiny element of chaos that in a minute will become the key to understanding everything happening. Look at the right corner of the roof. There, on an old rickety wooden fruit crate, stands an unfinished bottle of dark stout. Gary put it there a second ago, before taking off his shirt. The liquid inside is dark, almost black, and the foam is frozen at the very edge of the rim. The crate is uneven. One wrong move, one strong vibration through the floor, and the bottle will fall. Remember this bottle. It is the timer of this fight, a ticking bomb whose existence is known only to physics. Listen here, boy. Gary's voice sounds like gravel grinding in a concrete mixer, low, hoarse, soaked in alcohol and contempt. He spits on the concrete, and the spit lands just a centimeter from Bruce's boot. Legs are for walking, not for fighting. Step up, and I'll show you what a real man's sport is. I'll jab the nonsense out of you, and you'll forget your own name. Do you feel that level of aggression? This isn't sport. This is a street execution. Gary isn't planning to score points. He's planning to maim. He raises his hands in a classic boxing stance, elbows tucked, chin down. It's a perfect defense, honed by years of training. Any street fighter would break their hands against this block. But Bruce Lee doesn't take a stance. He stands with his arms down at his sides, completely open. Is this madness, or is it an invitation? Gary sees this as disrespect. His face turns crimson, the veins in his neck bulging like blue ropes. He's used to being feared. Fear is his fuel. But in Bruce's eyes, there is no fear. There isn't even anger. There is absolute icy calculation, a computer scanning the system for vulnerabilities. Bruce isn't looking at the champion's fists. He's looking at his knees. Why? What did he see there? This gaze irritates Gary more than any words. He takes a sharp breath through his nose, like the snort of a bull, and begins his move. This isn't the chaotic lunge of a drunkard. This is a professional shuffle. Gary closes the distance, his massive body moving with frightening ease for such weight. He prepares the strike, a left jab, fast, snapping, designed to break the nose and blind the opponent with pain. You hold your breath. You realize that if this fist, the size of a melon, hits its mark, the fight ends in an instant knockout. Bruce doesn't move. He waits. He allows Gary to enter the strike zone. The distance closes to half a meter. You can already hear the whistle of the sliced air. You see the muscles in the boxer's back tighten as he puts momentum into the punch. It seems there is no way out. A concrete wall behind, a drop to the side, a monster in front. But at the moment Gary's knuckles should have met Bruce's face, something happens that makes your brain stall. Bruce doesn't block the punch. He doesn't jump back. He makes a microscopic body movement to the left. The fist flies past his ear, not even grazing a hair. Momentum pulls Gary forward. He loses his balance for a fraction of a second, his heavy boots stomping loudly on the roof as he tries to regain his footing. Thud. The vibration from that step travels through the concrete to the crate in the corner. The stout bottle shudders. Foam spills over the edge, but the bottle holds, for now. Gary spins around, his eyes bloodshot. He doesn't understand how he missed. He thinks it's a fluke. He thinks Bruce just got lucky. But is that true? Or are we witnessing the start of a game whose rules are known to only one person on this roof? Gary spun on his heels with the grace of an infuriated bear, and in his eyes, bloodshot and clouded by cheap alcohol, there was no longer mockery, only pure, unadulterated, murderous intent. Do you think the miss of the first punch made him pause or become more cautious? You overestimate the survival instinct of a man used to the world bending under his weight. In his drunken mind, that miss was merely a frustrating error, a random glitch in the matrix that he intended to correct immediately and with maximum brutality. "You're fast, like a cockroach," he hissed, wiping sweat from his eyes with the back of his glove. "But cockroaches get crushed." Gary grouped himself again, his muscles tensing, turning his body into a siege engine, and he threw his right hand in a monstrous hook capable of tearing a head from its shoulders. The air didn't just whistle, it howled, sliced by the mass of a fist flying with the speed of an express train. Ask yourself honestly right now, if you were standing on a rooftop in the semi-darkness and saw an object the size of a melon flying toward your temple, capable of turning your skull into shards, what would you do? Your brain would likely command you to close your eyes and throw your hands up in a desperate block, hoping for a miracle. It's a reflex wired into us by millions of years of evolution. But Bruce Lee hacked that code. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't raise his hands. He looked directly at the incoming threat with frightening calmness, and in the fraction of a second before the blow reached its target, he simply ceased to be there. It didn't look like a boxer's slip. Bruce didn't duck under the arm. He shifted his axis of rotation, allowing Gary's fist to fly a millimeter from the tip of his nose. The momentum of the punch was so great that Gary was spun almost 360 degrees. His heavy boots struck the concrete again, searching for grip. Clink. The sound was quiet, barely audible over the heavy breathing of the fighters, but it was there. That same bottle of stout on the crate in the corner swayed again. The liquid inside splashed against the glass, creating a microscopic wave. The crate creaked. The bottle shifted a centimeter toward the edge of the abyss, but it didn't fall. Gary, disoriented by his own rotation, stopped, breathing heavily. He looked at Bruce and couldn't understand what was happening. Why isn't this kid running? Why isn't he counterattacking? Bruce stood 2 steps away, completely relaxed, a faint, barely noticeable smile playing on his face, a smile that wounded the champion's pride deeper than any knife. "Your arms are short, and your stance is too wide," Bruce said in the voice of a teacher scolding a negligent student. "You are like a house without a foundation. You throw your strength into the wind, and the wind laughs at you." Those words were the detonator. Gary roared. He felt rage flood his mind, displacing the last remnants of tactics. He decided he was done playing cat and mouse. He decided to use his ultimate weapon, the combination. Left, right, uppercut, left again. He turned into a windmill of death, throwing punches with machine gun speed, any one of which could be fatal. He pressed forward, driving Bruce toward the edge of the roof, where there were no railings, where one wrong step meant a 5-story fall. The viewer feels a chill. Bruce has nowhere to go. He retreats. He evades, but the space is running out. 1 more meter and he'll fly down. Does Gary see fear in his eyes? No. He sees a void. And suddenly, when it seemed Bruce was cornered, something happens that turns everything upside down. The very Santa Barbara effect you didn't expect. Bruce stops. He ceases his retreat. 1/2 meter remains to the edge of the roof. Gary raises his hand for the final, finishing blow, certain the victim is paralyzed by fear. But Bruce does the unthinkable. He drops his hands completely. He opens his chest, his stomach, his face. He becomes an open target. Is this suicide? A gesture of despair? Gary freezes for a fraction of a second. His brain cannot process this signal. Why does the opponent surrender before death? Strike, Bruce whispers, his eyes flashing in the dark. But remember, the harder you hit, the more it will hurt when you fall. Gary thinks it's a bluff. He thinks Bruce has lost his mind. He sees the open jaw, a sweet, unprotected target. He puts all 100 kilograms of his weight, all his hatred, all his career into this last, decisive right hand. He is certain it all ends now, but he doesn't know that Bruce was waiting for exactly this moment. The moment of maximum amplitude, when a boxer loses control of his center of gravity and becomes a hostage to his own inertia. Time on the roof compressed into a single point of singularity, where the laws of physics gave way to something more ancient and terrifying, and at that point, Gary Elms's fist, this hammer of bone and flesh, was exactly 2 millimeters from Bruce Lee's nose. Have you ever seen a bullet freeze in midair in slow motion? That is exactly what was happening before the eyes of the invisible spectators. Gary had put everything into this punch, his reputation, his weight, his hatred for dancers, and his conviction that boxing was the top of the food chain. His lungs were empty, having pushed out the air with a fierce growl. His eyes were closed in anticipation of the sweet sound of breaking facial cartilage, and he could already see Bruce's body flying toward the edge of the abyss. In his reality, victory was already a finished fact, written into history. But Bruce Lee's reality worked at a different frame rate. In that microscopic gap of time, separating life from death, Bruce didn't blink. Do you expect him to raise a block? To try and catch the arm? That would be suicide, for stopping a 100-kilogram projectile with a palm means a broken wrist. Bruce did something that contradicted all instincts. He didn't protect his head. Instead, he simply vanished. It didn't look like a human movement. It looked like a shadow disappearing when the light is cut. Bruce, sharply and without a wind-up, dropped his center of gravity. His knees bent, his body folded like a pocket knife, and the champion's fist, aimed at the jaw, sliced through the void where the legend's head had been a second ago. The whistle of the sliced air was so loud it drowned out the hum of the night city. Whoosh! The sound of a miss, the sound of a mistake that costs a life. Momentum is a cruel mistress. Gary, meeting no resistance, fell forward. His massive chest opened up, his balance was shattered, and he hung in the air, pulled by the weight of his own arm. He looked like a falling tower that had already tilted, but hadn't yet touched the ground. And in this moment of absolute vulnerability, when the boxer was as helpless as an infant, Bruce delivered his counterstrike. But it wasn't a hand strike. Do you remember what Gary said at the beginning? Legs are for walking. Bruce was going to make him swallow those words along with his teeth, but not the way you think. He didn't kick him in the head. That's a movie trick that could cost you your balance on a slippery roof. Bruce was a pragmatist. His right leg shot from the floor like a spring, but the trajectory of the strike was low, mean, and brilliant. The target wasn't the face. The target was the foundation. Gary's lead leg, which was now supporting his entire colossal weight, was straightened and tensed like a wire. Bruce struck with the edge of his boot exactly into the side of the knee. Snap! This sound didn't resemble meat hitting meat. It was a dry, sharp sound, like a shot from a small caliber rifle or the crack of a dry branch breaking in the woods. It was a sound that makes anyone who has ever had a joint injury cringe inside. The strike landed perfectly at the ligament attachment point, right where the peroneal nerve passes. It's not just pain, it's an electric discharge that instantly disconnects the limb from the central nervous system. Do you think Gary screamed immediately? No. The Santa Barbara effect comes into play again. The boxer's brain hadn't yet received the signal of the catastrophe. He was still flying forward by the momentum of his miss, thinking he had simply tripped. He didn't know yet that his leg no longer belonged to him. He didn't know that his career, his titles, his pride. All of it had been destroyed by one short, invisible foot movement that lasted less than a tenth of a second. Bruce, having delivered the strike, immediately returned his foot to its place, restoring perfect balance. He stood to the side of the giant flying past him, his face a mask of absolute calmness. He didn't look at his enemy with hatred. He looked at him with the pity of a surgeon forced to amputate a limb to save the patient from the gangrene of stupidity. And only now, 2 endless seconds after contact, did the information reach Gary's brain. His supporting leg, the very pillar his temple of strength stood upon, simply buckled. It didn't bend. It twisted inward at an unnatural angle. Gravity, which he had ignored, suddenly collapsed on him with the full weight of the planet. 100 kilograms of muscle crashed down, deprived of support. Gary didn't fall like a fighter. He fell like a sack of sand, clumsily, heavily, face first, directly onto the dirty concrete of the roof. His hands instinctively shot forward to soften the fall, but it was too late. His knees met the floor. Crunch. Now it wasn't just a snap. It was the sound of destruction. The vibration from the fall of a body of such mass traveled across the entire roof, making the glass in the windows of neighboring buildings jingle plaintively. And at that moment, while the echo of the impact still hung in the air, Bruce's gaze darted to the corner, to that very crate. The bottle. That same bottle of stout. It stood there, forgotten by everyone, but now the shockwave from the champion's fall reached it. The dark liquid inside foamed. The glass swayed. The balance was broken. The dark, thick liquid from the shattered bottle slowly spread across the uneven concrete of the roof, mixing with dust and sweat, creeping toward the fallen champion's face like a black oil slick, and the sight was more terrifying than any blood. Clink. The sound of bursting glass, which rang out a second after the body fell, became the final chord in the symphony of destruction, directed by a single leg strike. Gary Elms, a man whose name inspired terror in every port bar from Liverpool to Singapore, lay in a puddle of cheap beer and his own helplessness. Do you think he lost consciousness? Do you hope that merciful darkness covered him from the shame? Oh no, reality is far more cruel. Gary was fully conscious. His eyes were wide open, and in them swirled not pain, but a primal animal terror that his body had betrayed him. He tried to spring up. It was a fighter's reflex. Fall down, get up, strike, kill. His powerful arms, covered in tattoos, pushed against the floor, his biceps bulging, ready to hurl his torso upward, but his lower body remained lying as dead weight. His right leg, the very pillar Bruce's boot had slammed into, was silent. It wasn't numbness. It was a void, as if someone had cut the wires in a complex machine. Gary growled, and the sound was like the grinding of metal. He jerked, trying to force his muscles to contract through willpower, but the leg dragged behind him like a bag of wet sand. Have you ever experienced a nightmare where you want to run but cannot move? Gary was living that nightmare awake. He rolled onto his back, breathing heavily, his gaze fixed on the Hong Kong night sky, then sliding down to the man who had done this to him. Do you expect Bruce to be standing in a heroic pose, to raise his hands in a victory gesture? You're thinking in cliches again. Bruce Lee stood absolutely still, his arms hanging at his sides, his chest rising steadily as if he had just stepped out for a walk, not evaded a strike capable of bringing down a wall. But the most terrifying thing wasn't his calmness. The most terrifying thing was where he was looking. He wasn't looking at Gary. He was looking at the shards of the bottle, at that very puddle of stout in which the moon was now reflected. Bruce took a step forward. Crunch. Glass squeaked under his sole. Gary flinched. He covered his face with his hands, expecting the finishing blow, a stomp to the head that would turn his brain to mush. After all, that's exactly what he would have done. Street rules are simple. You don't hit a man when he's down. You finish him so he doesn't get back up. But the blow didn't come. Instead, a shadow covered him. Bruce crouched down next to the giant's head, ignoring the fact that the boxer's hands were still dangerous. He leaned in so close that Gary could feel his breath and spoke a phrase that hit harder than any brass knuckles. "How will you strike me with your hands if you cannot even stand on the ground?" Bruce whispered. His voice was quiet, devoid of malice, almost clinical. He pointed a finger at the broken bottle. "Did you see it? It didn't fall because I pushed it. It fell because I shook the foundation it stood on. You were that bottle, Gary. You built a fortress on sand." At this moment, the viewer experiences that intellectual orgasm. The puzzle pieces fit. You realize the bottle at the start of the scene wasn't a prop. It was a metaphor. Bruce wasn't fighting a man. He was solving an engineering problem of demolishing an unstable structure. He saw that the boxer's wide stance and his reliance on heavy punches made him vulnerable to losing balance. The strike to the leg wasn't just an attack. It was knocking the wedge out from under a tilted cabinet. Gary lowered his hands. He looked at Bruce, and in his eyes, rage began to give way to something else. Realization? Fear? He understood that he had just been taken apart for spares without Bruce receiving a single scratch. You broke my knee?" he rasped, a child's plea in his voice. Bruce shook his head. He slowly straightened up, towering over the fallen champion like a judge. "I don't break toys that can learn to play correctly," he said. "And then comes the turn you didn't expect." Bruce turns his back. He simply walks away. He leaves Gary lying in glass and beer. Will he really leave him there? Is this the end? But look at Gary's face. His grimace of pain is replaced by surprise. He feels a tingling in his toes. Warmth returns to the knee. The paralysis recedes. It wasn't a fracture. It was a precision strike to a nerve cluster. A temporary system shutdown. A warning shot at point-blank range. Bruce could have made him a cripple for life, but he chose a lesson over an execution. Why? Why spare a monster who wanted to kill you? In this question lies the final mystery of this night, the answer to which will change the boxer's fate forever. The door leading to the roof slammed shut with a heavy metallic clang, cutting Gary off from the only person who had ever dared to show him his true place in the food chain. And the sound echoed in the void of the Hong Kong night, leaving the champion alone with his demons and shards of glass. You probably think the story ended with the beaten boxer crawling home to lick his wounds, cursing the day he crossed paths with the Chinese dancer. You expect that the next morning he gathered a gang of dock workers to find Bruce and take revenge in a mob, as happens in cheap crime dramas. If you think that, you understood nothing about the nature of true defeat. Gary lay in the puddle of flat stout, looking at the stars. Feeling sensitivity return to his leg in slow, tingling waves. It was agonizing, but this physical pain was nothing compared to the tectonic shift occurring in his mind. He had come here certain that hands were hammers and legs were just stands for the body. He left with the understanding that he was an architect who had tried to build a skyscraper on a swamp. That night, Gary Elms did not descend from the roof as the same man. The thug who had terrorized the bars of Sim Shat Sui died there amidst the broken glass. You ask, what became of him? Did he drink himself to death, or join a monastery? Reality is far more interesting than fiction. 10 years later, in a smoke-filled boxing gym in East London, one could find a limping coach who leaned on a cane. He didn't have an injury. He didn't need the cane for walking. That was Gary. He used that cane to hit his students on the legs. Cruel? Perhaps. But his students became champions, not because of the power of their punch. They became untouchable because of their footwork. Gary, the man who had laughed at leg strikes, became the most fanatical preacher of balance in the history of British boxing. He often repeated one phrase while watching young heavyweights trying to put everything into a punch. Power is a debt you borrow from the ground. If your legs cannot pay back that loan, you are bankrupt. Do you see the irony? That very low kick from Bruce didn't break his career. It created it anew, turning a dull brawler into a wise mentor. But let's return to that second on the roof, to that very moment of truth that divided the world of martial arts into before and after. We all admire Bruce's speed, his philosophy, his charisma, but one dirty, uncomfortable question remains hanging in the air like the smell of gunpowder after a shot. Bruce Lee, the great master, the icon of honor, struck a man in the leg during a boxing match. Formally, it was a violation of the rules. Gary had challenged him to a fight with hands. Bruce accepted the challenge, but changed the rules of the game mid-match. Is this the genius of adaptation, or the meanness of a street fighter who was afraid to win fairly? This is where the real battle begins, and you must take part. Look at it from the boxer's perspective. He was deceived. He came out to fight like a man and got a low blow, metaphorically speaking. But look at it from Bruce's perspective. In a real fight, there are no rules. There are only the living and the dead. If Gary had attacked him in an alley with a knife, would anyone condemn a strike to the knee? But this was a roof. It was a kind of duel. Where is the line between strategy and dishonor? This question is more important than the fight itself. It forces us to rethink the very concept of fairness in a conflict. I want you right now to go down to the comments and make a choice that your understanding of martial arts depends on. Don't try to be polite. Write one word: genius. If you believe Bruce taught a lesson in reality and won through intellect. Or write dirty if you believe a great master should not stoop to such tricks against an athlete. And one more thing. The most observant among you noticed the bottle at the start of the video. Bruce didn't look at it before the fight for no reason. At what second did you realize that this bottle was not just trash, but a spoiler for the entire match? Write the timestamp. Let's see how many people here have the true vision of a predator and who was just looking at the picture. The discussion is now open.